إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الكلام كلام الله أحسن الحدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار وبعد. Dear Ikhwan, in these sessions we're going to begin then with the Tafsir of that great Imam, Al-Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah ta'ala. We decided, Ikhwan, that in these sessions, bi'idhnillah, we wanted to discuss and work through one of the best of the books of tafsir that were authored around the explanation of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Knowing that the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بُيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِلَّا نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةُ وَغَشِيَتْهُمُ الرَّحْمَةُ وَنَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ وَحَفَّتْهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ وَذَكَرَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنْ عِنْدَهُ. That indeed no people gather in a house from the houses of Allah, reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and studying it between them, except that mercy descends upon them and that Allah Azza wa Jal encompasses them with sakina, that is with tranquility, and they are likewise have the malaika descended upon them, spreading their wings, and Allah mentions them in a gathering with Him. And that, brothers and sisters, is what we hope, inshallah, these sittings will allow or cause us to be from among the people mentioning that in that hadith. That Allah Azza wa Jal makes us among those individuals who are encompassed by His rahmah on the basis of our attempt to draw closer to Allah Azza wa Jal by way of seeking knowledge of His speech and of His kalam, which no doubt is munazzal min indi. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ikhwan, has blessed us no doubt with having a number of books that have explained His kitab and have explained His speech. And those books, brothers and sisters, continue to remain among us. Books, brothers and sisters, that have been authored in different manners. For indeed, our scholars, as it relates to the scholars of tafsir, have utilized and have taken different approaches to explaining the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. We have the likes of the tafsir of Imām al-Qurtubi, whose tafsir, ikhwan, revolves around, for the most part, analyzing the Quran by way of the ahkam and the rulings that are extrapolated from the verses. And so Imām al-Qurtubi, his tafsir revolves for the most part around extrapolating from the verses of Allah ahkam and rulings. And so he will mention that in it from ahkam is the following. And in these verses from ahkam and from rulings are the following rulings. And so his tafsir is and specializes in that. Then we have the likes of Nazm al-Durar of al-Buqa'i, who mentions ayat, and his tafsir revolves around the munasabat, or what is the relation between one verse and another. Why did Allah mention this verse after that verse? And likewise the relation between the surah. Why did Allah mention such and such a surah after another surah? And that, ikhwan, it was the concentration that he had. We had the likes of Adwa al-Bayan of Al-Imam al-Shinqiti rahimahullah ta'ala, Muhammad Amin, which is and concentrates upon tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an, the tafsir of the Quran by way of the Quran itself. And so he concentrates upon using the book of Allah Azza wa Jal to explain the book of Allah. Wherever Allah Azza wa Jal mentions a statement that is relatively clear or is general, for example, in a place, he'll mention the various verses that bring clarity to that one verse. And so Imam Muhammad Amin in his book Adwa al-Bayan, had concentrated upon explaining the Quran by way of the Quran itself. And then we have Ikhwan, those tafsir that were authored by the contemporary scholars, the likes of the Tafsir of Al-Imam Abdul Rahman, Sheikh Abdul Rahman bin Nasir al-Sa'di rahimahullah, wherein he has simplified that which is present within the books of tafsir generally, and presented that in a simple manner for the general Muslims. And then, Ikhwan, we have the likes of the tafsir of the great Imam, which is possibly, Ikhwan, as it has been mentioned by many, as possibly the best tafsir that exists. And that is, Ikhwan, that though there are and have been authored kutub and books of tafsir that were extensive, for example, like the tafsir of Imam Ibn Jarir, which in its origin and its asl is considered similarly the best of the books of tafsir that have been authored, in that Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari has gathered narrations, athar, and has collected them with asanid. So he mentions the ahadith of the Messenger of Allah, he mentions the athar of the Sahaba ridwanullahi alayhim, and he mentions them with isnad. And so, Ikhwan, it is possible to trace back the tafsir of an ayah that has come to us by way of the Messenger ﷺ, or by way of a companion or a tabi'i, and trace that back with a chain of narration, going back to its qa'il and going back to the one who made the statement. And so that is indeed one of the greatest books of tafsir al-itlaq, to the extent that Imam or that some of the A'immah would mention that if a person سافر إلى الصين لتفسير ابن جرير لم يكن ذلك كثير, that if a person traveled to China to obtain a copy of Tafsir ibn Jarir, then indeed that would not have been kathir, that would not have been much, or would not have been an arduous task. For indeed the affair, Ikhwan, is one that revolves around the best and the greatest of the books that have explained the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Tafsir ibn Jarir. And there were many books that were authored in that manner, gathering the narrations and the athar with isnad. Tafsir ibn Abi Hatim, we have Tafsir al-Baghawi, and we have, Ikhwan, some of those tafsir that are now lost, like the Tafsir of Ibn Mardawayh. The Tafsir of Ibn Mardawayh is lost, and the only thing that we have from it is that which was mentioned by Imam Ibn Kathir. That Imam Ibn Kathir will mention وَقَالَ Ibn Mardawayh. Ibn Mardawayh mentioned in his tafsir, and then he'll mention his statements. And so we're able to extrapolate and benefit from the tafsir of Ibn Mardawayh, even though it is lost, but we're still able to benefit from it by way of Tafsir Ibn Kathir of Al-Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah ta'ala. Concerning Imam Ibn Kathir himself, Ikhwan, then Al-Imam Ahmad Shakir has mentioned something from his biography, and we'll mention something from that. Ibn Kathir himself, he is Al-Hafiz, Al-Imam, Al-Hujjah, Al-Muhaddith, Al-Mu'arrikh, Al-Thiqa, Dhul Fadail, Imad al-Din, Abu al-Fida, Ismail ibn Umar ibn Kathir ibn Daw ibn Kathir, Al-Qurashi, Al-Dimishqi, Al-Shafi'i. That name and that title, Ikhwan, that he is commonly known by, that is his name Ibn Kathir, was in actuality the name of his grandfather. That was the name of his grandfather. His name was actually Ismail. Ibn Kathir, Ikhwan, when he speaks concerning his children, or the children of his father and his siblings, he mentions the names of his siblings, and from them he mentions that my father had a number of children, and from them my oldest brother, his name was Ismail. And then I had another brother by the name of Yunus, and then Idris, and then Abdul Wahhab, and then he mentions Abdul Aziz, and I had a number of sisters, and then my father had me and named me Ismail. So his oldest brother was Ismail, and his name was likewise Ismail. Ismail al-Kabir and Saghir. His father obviously liked the name Ismail, and so he named his youngest son Ismail. Ibn Kathir was born when, or his father was close, or was of age when he was born. And in fact, when his father passed away, he was 3 years old. And so when he himself speaks about his father, he doesn't speak about him from a personal basis, because he doesn't remember his father, other than he mentions hulm, or that which resembles a dream, or that which resembles, I barely remember him. And so he speaks of him by way of some of the students of his father, and the narrations that have come from some of the students of his father, as his father was indeed a very great scholar. And he mentions concerning his father that indeed he was a khatib, that he was one that was well known to be a khatib, a prolific person who would give sermons on a Friday, and he was from the ulama and from the fuqaha of Dimishq, and of the region of Dimishq, which is in Syria. Ibn Kathir himself was of Dimishqi Mawlid, and he was born in Dimishq. That his father was from a qarya, or a village known as Mijdal, and his mother was from a qarya known as Busra, which was from or both of them being in Dimishq, or in the area of Damascus. Similarly, he, as we mentioned, was born 3 years after, or 3 years before his father passed away. His father passed away in the year 307. And so, Ikhwan, in actuality, the exact year of the birth of Ibn Kathir is not known, but it is approximated on the basis of the fact that he mentions that I was 3 when my father passed away, and my father passed away in the year 307. And so some of the scholars differ concerning whether or not he was actually 3 years old when his father passed away, or was that just an approximation that he had mentioned. And so, on the basis of the fact that he mentions that his father passed away in the year 703, sorry, 703, is year 307 I mentioned, 703. On the basis of the fact that he mentioned that his father passed away in 703, then the scholars mention, and they track back and say that he then must have been born in approximately the year 700 after Hijrah. And so his actual date of birth was not known, but the scholars who mention, and the biographers who mention that which is related to his life, they mention that he was born in approximately the year 700 after Hijrah. Similarly, Ikhwan, as far as Ibn Kathir is concerned, then Imam Ibn Kathir, as far as him being busy with ilm, then he began to busy himself with ilm from a young age, and he began to study upon his youngest brother, his brother Abdul Wahhab. His brother Abdul Wahhab was from those who studied or taught him, and he studied with his father, and then went on to teach him after his father had passed away. So he began to study with his brother Abdul Wahhab, and he was one that was excellent as far as striving to obtain knowledge. And he memorized the Quran by the year 711. By the year 711, he memorized the Quran, which necessitates that he was approximately 11 years old when he memorized the Quran. And Sheikh Ahmad Shakir mentions concerning him, وَخَتَمَ حِفْظَهُ سَنَةَ 711, that he finished his Quran and he memorized the Quran in completion in the year 711, again, which would necessitate that he was 11 years old. And then Al-Imam Sheikh Ahmad Shakir mentions, وَسَمِعَ الْحَدِيثُ مِنْ كَثِيرٍ مِنْ أَئِمَّةِ الْحُفَّاظِ فِي عَصْرِهِ, that he heard hadith and listened to hadith from many of the huffaz and the great memorizers in his time. وَعُنِيَ بِالسَّمَاعِ وَالْإِكْثَارِ مِنْهُ, he was well known and was concerned with listening to hadith, and with attending the gatherings of hadith and hearing hadith. He mentions فَمِمَّا ذُكِرَ في تاريخه أنه سمع صحيح مسلم في 9 مجالس على الشيخ نجم الدين ابن العسقلاني. He mentioned that what was mentioned concerning him was that he heard, or he read the whole of Sahih Muslim to his sheikh, one of the scholars of hadith that he studied under Najm al-Din ibn al-Asqalani, in 6 sittings. in 9 sittings. The whole of Sahih Muslim, he read to his sheikh in 9 sittings, and he was present with a number of other students of hadith. And that, ikhwan, was one of the manners in which the scholars of hadith would allow their students to benefit from them and take hadith from them. Sometimes that they would explain, or they would make mention of the hadith and narrate and then explain. And sometimes their sittings were sittings of that which was known as imla, which was that the scholar would sit and he would narrate. The sitting would begin, the scholar wouldn't speak, that he would just narrate. حدثنا 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 قال حدثنا قال حدثنا. And the whole sitting was an extensive sitting just of narration. And on the basis of those sittings, they would go through a number of books in a short period of time, just on the basis of hearing those ahadith. And the students would pen the ahadith down, and likewise would pen the various chains of narration that went back to the sheikh who they were sitting with. He was likewise mentioned in his biography that he lazim al-Imam al-Kabir Abu al-Hajjaj al-Mizzi, that he clung to and he lazama and spent much time with that great Imam of Hadith, Al-Hafiz al-Mizzi. Al-Hafiz al-Mizzi was the author of one of the most extensive books of biography of Rijal, of the narrators of Hadith, the book known, ikhwan, as Tahdhib al-Kamal. Alhamdulillah, we have the book, ikhwan, present today, and it is, if anyone has a library, he will know that it is possibly one of the largest, if not the largest book in his library now, having some 38 volumes, and it is always the book that everybody says, Yakhi, what's that book there about? The longest book in your library, and the book that crosses some 2 shelves. Al-Imam Ibn Kathir, ikhwan, read the whole of Tahdhib al-Kamal to Al-Imam Mizzi. And Imam Mizzi loved Ibn Kathir so much that he married him to his daughter Zainab. He married him to his daughter Zainab. And then Al-Imam Ibn Kathir went on to make mulazama and cling to Al-Imam Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And it was on the basis of him clinging to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah that he went through the trials that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah went through with the rulers and what have you. Similarly, Ibn Kathir was affected by that on the basis of the fact that he was known to be the student, the close student, and the mulazim of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. So he was prisoned alongside Shaykh al-Islam when Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah was imprisoned. And Ahmad Shakir, he mentioned concerning his biography, وَامْتُحِنَ بِسَبَبِ ذَلِكَ وَأُوذِي, that because of the love that he had for Shaykh al-Islam and his closeness, that he was put to trial on the basis of that, and he was harmed by the ruler on the basis of his mulazama and the basis of his love for Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And some of the biographers mentioned that it was in actuality on the basis of the position, or a position related to talaq, that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah held that the man who pronounces talaq 3 times in one sitting, then that is considered 1 talaq. And Shaykh al-Islam, though, he began to promote that, spread that, and likewise Al-Imam Ibn Kathir was likewise upon that, and it opposed the position of those who were present at that time from among the rulers and those who were the hukam at that time. And thus that was one of the reasons, or one of the fatwa that caused them to be imprisoned and them to receive the type of harm that they received. Similarly, ikhwan, from those who were present at the time of Ibn Kathir and are in actuality considered from the tabaqat, or from the levels of his teachers, even though he benefited from him as a student, we had the great Imam Al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi. Al-Hafiz al-Dhahabi was much older than Shaykh al-Islam, than Ibn Kathir, and he likewise passed away some 26 years before Ibn Kathir, and he was of the level and the age group and the category of the teachers of Ibn Kathir. But Al-Imam al-Dhahabi, though that was the case, Al-Imam al-Dhahabi mentions concerning Ibn Kathir, mentions in praise of him and speaks of him as though he was his sheikh, even though he had benefited from him as a student. Al-Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions in Tabaqat al-Huffaz, he mentions وسمعت من الفقيه المفتي المحدث ذو الفضائل عماد الدين إسماعيل بن عمر بن كثير البصروي الشافعي. He said that I heard from the great Imam, the faqih, the mufti, the muhaddith, the possessor of many great virtues, Imad al-Din Ismail ibn Umar ibn Kathir al-Busrawi al-Shafi'i. He said, وسمع من ابن شحنة وابن الرداد وطائفة. He said, and he likewise heard, that is Imam ibn Kathir, he likewise heard from Ibn Shahna and Ibn Raddad and a group of other scholars. Imam al-Dhahabi continues concerning him, له عناية بالرجال والمتون والفقه وخرج وناظر وصنف وفسر وتقدم. He said that he had much concern for narrators, for mutun, that is the wordings and the text of hadith, for fiqh, and he kharraj, that is that he narrated a hadith from various chains of narration. He debated, he authored, he established tafsir, and he established tafsir yani of the Quran, and taqaddam, yani he was he preceded many. Similarly, ikhwan, we have that which was narrated by Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah, who mentioned Al-Imam Al-Mufti Al-Muhaddith Al-Bari' وفقيه المتفنن والمحدث المتقن والمفسر النقال. He mentions that he was the Imam Al-Mufti, the Imam and the Mufti, the Muhaddith Al-Bari', yani the distinguished Muhaddith and scholar of Hadith, the precise Faqih, the Muhaddith Al-Mutqin, similarly the precise Muhaddith, and the Mufassir, or the one who explained the book of Allah Azza wa Jal and narrated much. Similarly, from his Talamid and from his students, we have the statement of Shihab al-Din ibn Hijji, who mentions كان أحفظ من أدركنا لمتون الأحاديث وأعرفهم بتخريجها ورجالها وصحيحها وسقيمها وكان أقرانه وشيخه يعترفون به بذلك. He said that indeed he was the one who was, or who had memorized the most text of ahadith from those who I have come across, and he was the most knowledgeable concerning its chains of narration and its narrators, and that which is authentic from it, and that which is saqim, that which is weak and da'if. And he said that those who were around him from his contemporaries and his shuyukh, and his teachers and his scholars, they acknowledged that concerning him. He said, وَكَانَ يَسْتَحْذِرُ كَثِيرًا مِنَ التَّفْسِيرِ وَالتَّارِيخِ وَقَلِيلُ النِّسْيَانِ. He said that he would easily bring to memory much from that which is related to tafsir and to history, and he was قَلِيلُ النِّسْيَانِ. He forgot little. وَكَانَ فَقِيهًا جَيِّدَ الْفَهَمِ صَحِيحُ الذِّهْنِ. He said that he was likewise a faqih, a jurist, and he was good in his understanding and sound, of sound mind. He memorized At-Tanbih, which was a book in Shafi'i fiqh, and it remained with him until the end of his days. وَيُشَارِكُ فِي الْعَرَبِيَّةِ مُشَارَكَةً جَيِّدًا. He mentioned, and he would likewise participate in the sciences of the Arabic language, and he would do so in a good manner. And he was likewise one that wrote poetry. وَمَا أَعْرِفُ أَنِّي اجْتَمَعْتُ بِهِ عَلَى كَثْرَةِ تَرَدُّدِي عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا اسْتَفَدْتُ مِنْهُ. He said, and I do not remember that I came together with him and met up with him even though I did so plentifully, except that I would benefit from him. I do not remember meeting him, except that I would benefit from him. You oftentimes hear, Ikhwan, the statement Qurashi in his lineage and in the, or towards the end of his name. That was because of the fact that he mentions that my Sheikh, yani Imam Mizzi, came across the fact that our people and his qawm and his tribe had in actuality a lineage that was traced back to Quraysh. And so the Sheikh of Imām Ibn Kathir, Imam Mizzi, would praise him on the basis of that and would make mention of that, and thus he would be referred to as Al-Qurashi, even though he was from the area of Dimashq and from the region of Damascus. And so Imam Ibn Kathir, Ikhwan, established and well known as being that great Imam and Muhaddith, not just Ikhwan, a scholar of Tafsir. Oftentimes people don't realize that Imam Ibn Kathir, that even though he was popular for his Tafsir, that he was a great Muhaddith likewise, and was well known for that. And fairly recently, Ikhwan, one of the books that were authored by Imam Ibn Kathir, Jami' al-Masanid, which is a massive book, yani very voluminous and close to 30 odd volumes, was similarly from the authorships of Imam Ibn Kathir. He similarly summarized the book of Ibn Salah in Mustalah al-Hadith, al-Muqaddimah in Mustalah al-Hadith, and he wrote his Tarikh, yani al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, which is an extensive history from the beginning of time until his period, until the time that he lived, and from the beginning of time until the time that he lived. And he wrote many other works, Ikhwan, in other funun and in other sciences of ilm. He died, أيها الإخوة, in the year 774, and Ikhwan, his janazah was one that was well known and very extensively or very well attended, and he left as a wasiyah, or as a bequest, that he should be buried beside Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. He left that as his bequest, and that was the case, and it was what occurred after he passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. As far as the manhaj of Imam Ibn Kathir in his tafsir, then the approach that Imam Ibn Kathir has in his tafsir, Ikhwan, is an approach that, by Allah, for the one who reads Tafsir Ibn Kathir, he will know, Ikhwan, that it is not just tafsir that a person benefits from it, that he benefits, أيها الإخوة, يعني fiqh, he benefits aqidah, he benefits manhaj, he benefits usul, he benefits nahu, lugha, he benefits sarf, he benefits any science that you want to imagine. Literally every single science, from the sciences of ilm, from the sciences of the deen, then Al-Imam Ibn Kathir makes mention of them, Ikhwan, in some way, shape or form throughout his tafsir. It is a tafsir, Ikhwan, and it is a sitting with a book that is filled, ayyuhal ikhwa, with ulum and various branches of ilm. And so it is not just that he takes a verse and then he speaks around the verse. La. In it is hadith, in it is isnad, in it is mustalah. There are various branches of ilm, and you'll see, Ikhwan, as we go through and we work through the Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you'll see, Ikhwan, that it has many of the various branches of ilm. In one sitting with Tafsir Ibn Kathir, a person leaves with fiqh, hadith, aqidah, manhaj, history. There are many issues, Ikhwan, and you'll see as we work through. So the methodology of Imam Ibn Kathir in his tafsir is that first and foremost he works and he utilizes as his methodology tafsir of the Quran bil Quran, tafsir of the Quran with the Quran itself. And that is that he utilizes, and you'll see in many places when we go through and we work through, he uses the ayat that are present within the book of Allah Azza wa Jal to explain ayat. And so those verses that may seem ambiguous, he makes mention of ayat that are similar to them, that bring clarity to that verse, and he expound upon its meaning. Similarly, he utilizes, Ikhwan, from his methodology, tafsir al-Qur'an bis Sunnah. That is, that he utilizes the Sunnah in relation to his explanation of the Quran. And so what he will do in regards to his manhaj is that he'll mention those ayat that are relative to the ayah that he's explaining, and then he will similarly mention that which is related to the ahadith that have occurred in that regard. And Ibn Kathir himself makes mention of that and discusses that affair, and he mentions a number of verses in the introduction of his tafsir, mentioning his methodology in explaining the Quran by way of the Sunnah. And then he mentions a number of ayat. From them, he mentions the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ لِتَحْكُمَ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِمَا أَرَاكَ اللَّهُ. That indeed we have revealed to you, as occurs in Surah An-Nisa, we have revealed to you the book in truth, that you may judge between the people with that which Allah sees. And Allah wishes for you to judge among them. Similarly, he mentions وَمَا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ إِلَّا لِتُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. He mentions that indeed we have not revealed to you the book except that you should explain to them. And likewise, he mentions وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. That indeed we have revealed to you the reminder that you, O Muhammad, may explain to them and clarify to them what was revealed to them, and that perhaps they may reflect. And he mentions likewise the statement of the Messenger ﷺ, أَلَا إِنِّي أُوتِيتُ الْقُرْآنَ وَمِثْلَهُ مَعَ, that indeed I have been given the Quran and that which is like unto it with it. And so Imam Ibn Kathir, he mentions the fact that these ayat indicate clearly that the Sunnah is an explanation of the Quran. That the Sunnah is an explanation of the Quran, and for that reason we have that statement that Ahlul Hadith constantly mention, and that is that Ahlul Hadith أعلم الناس بكتاب الله. The Ahlul Hadith are the most knowledgeable of the people with the book of Allah subhanahu. For indeed, ikhwan, they are those who are most acquainted with the Sunnah, which is the explanation of the Quran. As Allah Azza wa Jalla has mentioned in the Quran, therefore it goes without saying that they are the most knowledgeable of the people with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then from his methodology in tafsir is that he utilizes the aqwal of the Sahaba when he explains and when he utilizes after utilizing the ayat and the ahadith. So he'll mention ayat, he'll mention ahadith, and then he'll mention statements from the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim if they are present. And ikhwan, what we'll likewise do when we work through is that if we come across that which is authentic, that was not mentioned by Imam Ibn Kathir, then we'll mention them as side points and as points of benefit if they were mentioned in other books of tafsir. But Imam Ibn Kathir does a good job, no doubt, of gathering that which is present around the meaning of the verses, whether it be other ayat, whether it be ahadith, or whether it be statements from the Salaf and statements from the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim. Ibn Kathir himself mentions إذا لم تجد التفسير في القرآن ولا في السنة رجعنا في ذلك إلى أقوال الصحابة. He said that if we do not find in relation to the tafsir anything in the Quran or in the Sunnah, then we return in that regard back to the statements of the Sahaba, for indeed they were most knowledgeable concerning that. They were most knowledgeable concerning that. لما شاهدوا من القرائن والأحوال التي اختصوا بها. He mentioned they are most knowledgeable concerning that and that which they witnessed from the varying factors and the affairs which only they witnessed and only they observed. And that is that they saw, ikhwan, on the basis of them being companions of the Messenger of Allah, they saw that which allowed them and gave them a ziyadat fahm and different understanding to anyone from among the ai*imah who came later. He said, وَالْعِلْمُ الصَّحِيحُ وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ, and that which they had similarly from correct knowledge and likewise righteous action, and that which they had وَلِمَا لَهُمْ مِنَ الْفَهْمِ التَّامِ, and for that which they possessed from complete understanding and perfect understanding. ولا سيما علماؤهم وكبارهم كالأئمة الأربعة الخلفاء الراشدين والأئمة المهديين وعبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنهم. He said especially the ulama and the major ones from among them, like the four great khulafa, and likewise the likes of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. For indeed, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhu, he mentioned concerning himself, وَالَّذِي لَا إِلَهَ غَيْرُهُ مَا نَزَلَتْ آيَةٌ مِّن كِتَابِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا وَأَنَا أَعْلَمُ فِي مَن نَزَلَتْ وَأَيْنَ نَزَلَتْ. He mentioned that indeed there is not an ayah in the book of Allah except that I know who it was revealed concerning and when it was revealed or where it was revealed. وَلَوْ أَعْلَمُ أَحَدًا أَعْلَمُ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ مِنِّي. He mentioned that if I knew an individual that was more knowledgeable concerning the book of Allah than myself, then I would have embarked or mounted my camel and rode to him. And so he utilizes then the statements of the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim to bring further fahm and understanding. Similarly, from his methodology is that he utilizes the aqwal al-tabi'een. Fourthly, that he utilizes the aqwal of the statements of the tabi'een. He himself mentioned إذا لم تجد التفسير في القرآن ولا في السنة ولا وجدته عن الصحابة فقد رجع كثير من الأئمة في ذلك إلى أقوال التابعين كالمجاهد بن جبر فإنه كان آية في التفسير. He mentioned that indeed if one does not find in the Quran or in the Sunnah and does not find among the statements of the companions that which explains a particular verse, then one would return in that regard to the statements of the great Imams from among the Tabi'een, the likes of Mujahid, who was an ayah in the explanation of the book of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And Mujahid mentions concerning himself that I read the Mus'haf to Ibn Abbas 3 times from Fatiha to its end, and I stopped him upon every verse and I asked him concerning the verse. That I read the Quran from its beginning to its end, from Fatiha to its end, and I stopped him upon every verse and I asked him about the meaning of that. Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned إذا جاءك التفسير عن مجاهد فحسبك به. He mentioned that if tafsir comes to you from Mujahid, then you should suffice with that. And then, ikhwan, we have the statement of Imam Ibn Kathir, or the methodology of Imam Ibn Kathir, wherein he would thereon make mention of that which has come from other or from latter day scholars, individuals who have made tafsir of the Quran and may have with them something from knowledge of tafsir that the Imam himself does not have. And those are we have in some rare instances that he makes mention of that. From the issues that Imam Ibn Kathir has been criticized about in the methodology in his tafsir is his narrating, and this is the 6th angle or aspect of his methodology and his approach to tafsir, he's narrating the Israeliyat. And that is that he narrates in the tafsir of unusually stories related to prophets and the messengers, that he narrates stories, ikhwan, that are considered or referred to as Israeliyat, or narrations from the children of Israel. And that is from the books of narrations that are present in the books that have passed. That is, he would take from the Bible or the other scriptures that were present at the time of some of the Salaf. And so, for example, you will have some narrations that are considered Israeliyat that were narrated by the Sahaba, some of them that were narrated by individuals from among the Tabi'een. And so, from among the Sahaba were those who were acquainted with the books that came before, and so they would occasionally make narration of that. And they would do so on the basis of the fact that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a number of ahadith, spoke about the people of the book, and said, for example, "Uhaddithu an bani Israel wala haraj." And narrate from the children of Israel, and there is no harm in that. Narrate from the children of Israel, and there is no harm in that. And then the Messenger likewise would mention, but do not accept that, do not believe them, and do not reject them, because of the fact that the book has been perverted and adulterated. Then it is not possible for us to accept completely what is mentioned within their book, but at the same time one should not and cannot reject that which is present within it on the basis of the fact that it could possibly be correct, except that which is narrated within it opposes that which is established and authentic in the Quran, in which case, no doubt, it is rejected and it is considered from the fabrications of those who had written the book with their own hands. But if, for example, it is something related to a story, mathalan, something related to a story connected to Musa, which you'll find a lot in Tafsir Ibn Kathir, that he mentioned stories or fill the gaps that may be present in some of the stories that we may not have received anything authentic concerning that. So he'll mention a story from Bani Israel that fills or what would appear to explain the reason behind an aspect of a story. And so some of the scholars, many of Ahlul Ilm, have criticized Imam Ibn Kathir for doing so, because those narrations are not few. Ikhwan, they're quite plentiful. And so those who have approached Ibn Kathir with an attempt and with the intent of trying to purify the tafsir, from the things that they have carried out is that they have removed from it, number one, the ahadith that have been repeated. And sometimes Imam Ibn Kathir, he'll mention a issue and then he'll repeat a number of riwayat of a hadith. So he'll repeat numerous versions of a hadith that explain, or in the explanation of one verse. So some of those who have tried to purify the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, then they would remove the repetitive ahadith, and they likewise remove the ahadith that are weak, da'ifa, and similarly they have removed or attempted to remove the Israeliyat and those narrations that are not established. And possibly from the best of those who have attempted to do so is the sheikh and the scholar Imam Ahmad Shakir. Imam Ahmad Shakir, in his book Iddat Tafsir, which is a mukhtasir and a purification of Tafsir Ibn Kathir, has done just that. That he has attempted to remove the repeat ahadith, those ahadith that are weak, or those statements that return back to Israeliyat, those narrations that are Israeliyat, and has attempted to purify Tafsir Ibn Kathir. So what we're going to be working through, inshallah, and our reliance in these sessions is going to be from the Uddat Tafsir of Sheikh Ahmad Shakir, and it is a book, ikhwan, that Sheikh Muhammad bin Hadi would praise regularly and mention that it is from the best of those attempts to purify Tafsir Ibn Kathir from those narrations that are weak, or the Israeliyat and other issues that are that Ibn Kathir has been criticized for. And so our reliance bi'idhnillah in the future sessions is going to be for the most part from the Umdat Tafsir of Sheikh Ahmad Shakir. And Umdat Tafsir, for those of you who are here in Birmingham, it is available, ikhwan, in, I believe Ahmad Sha'lan has prints of it in his bookshop. So if any of the brothers want to work with us, then inshallah you'll be able to obtain copies of the book there. And bi'idhnillah, from next week we'll begin with the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, and hopefully, ikhwan, we'll be able to, in as short a time as possible, complete the reading through Tafsir Ibn Kathir, and complete, ikhwan, the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, the tafsir of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. What should be mentioned though is that we're not going to be able to read every word within the tafsir, for that would take many decades. But what we're going to do is try and select choice passages that are relative to the verse, and hopefully try and take the most comprehensive passages that deal with the discussion of the ayah, or if there are passages, for example, that have important issues or any affairs that would be interesting for the brothers to discuss, then we're going to be working through those passages, and the selection then is going to be on that basis, and we will not be reading through every single word of the tafsir. Even the mukhtasir would take a long period of time, ikhwan, to work through. So from next week we're going to begin with Surah Al-Fatiha, inshallah, and continue from Fatiha, Baqarah, and so on throughout the Quran, bi'idhnillah, until we complete it and we possibly move on to Tafsir Ibn Kathir thereafter, inshallah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله.